Hey, this is Molly. Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I wanted to do a video for you on relationships because I know that is a big area of life for all of us, all kinds of relationships. But I thought I'd focus here on the energies of relating, dating, and mating, because when you are able to see your astrology chart through that lens, a lot can come alive. So we're going to journey through all 12 astrological houses, talking about what the energy is in each house and what you may notice in yourself around these particular energies. So these are only the houses. The houses are the environments or the areas of life and how these energies show up. Then in your natal chart, you would be looking at the planets you have in these houses, as well as the astrological signs. Now, this gets complicated. It gets complicated quickly. So that's also where it becomes more personal and individual. But this is an overview of how the cycle of energy progresses through all 12 houses. So we're going to start here with the first house. Now, the first house is essentially your relationship with yourself, your personal appearance, knowing yourself, self-care, self-acceptance, what you like about yourself, how you understand yourself. And this is where the energy essentially begins. Of course, energy doesn't just begin out of the blue. It is a progression. But the first house is where you start to know yourself, who you are, what you're about, your self-identity, and that's the formation of your relationship with yourself. Then it moves into the second house of your values. What matters to you? Where are you sourcing your self-worth? Where are you really seeing what you're about, understanding what you can do on your own? This is where we stabilize our energy. We stabilize our self-worth and understand what our standards are. So that could be a good keyword there for the second house, are your standards, the standards you have for yourself that are really about how you want to live your life. Then in the third house, we look at your communication style. This is how you express your ideas, your thoughts, your needs. This is where you share what you're thinking. This is the energy of talking and listening, being able to listen and take in information, and the perceptions that you are seeing around you, your perceptions of others, the perceptions of your life and what you're seeing in the world around you. So then the energy goes into the fourth house. Now, the fourth house is very significant because it's the formative childhood experiences when you were essentially unconscious and unaware. It's your environment that you grew up in. It's what you observed and felt with your parents. So this is actually the house where you observed your parents' relationship and how that left an unconscious imprint on you on what it meant to be yourself, to share your needs, how you understood what it meant to feel safe. The fourth house is very important because, again, it can be unconscious. And this is actually the house we go to do a lot of personal work from childhood. So it's related to what you observed and what you saw through your parents' relationship, how that formed your inner world and your personal needs, and how in touch you are with these parts of yourself. So again, when we're looking at relationship dynamics, this is a foundational energy in how you grew up. But again, it's mostly unconscious until you start to dig in and understand your needs as a child, what you felt, where you went when you needed to talk or share. This is actually a place where the first house, second house, and third house culminate. And you're saying, oh my gosh, was I safe to express myself and my ideas? Did I feel worthy? Did I feel like I knew myself? So this is the first four houses is where we do a lot of our personal work. Then we move into the fifth house. Now, the fifth house is also a part of your internal energy, but this is about desire, attraction, and fun. What you desire, what you're attracted to. This is primal energies. The parts of yourself where you're like, I'm just attracted to this kind of person, or I find myself always drawn to this type of energy or this type of person. This is where the energy is unspoken, where you just feel it. Like there's just something about it that you're drawn to. This is where the fifth house is taking a risk to be seen. This is where there can be a part of you that has the courage to ask someone out, right? Where you're putting yourself out there. The fifth house is those dating apps. It's the people you're attracted to or not attracted to. It's how you present yourself. This is also the energy of pleasure and sex, but non-committal. So non-committal sex, this can be like the friends with benefits stuff. This can be where it's, again, non-committal. So this is good to be aware of, because if you look back and notice any of your own patterns or how you show up in relationships, this fifth house has a lot of information about who you're attracted to and why. Again, it can be very primal, like you don't understand it. So the astrological sign and signs in the fifth house explain that. Planets in the fifth house explain that. And that's true for all these houses, but the fifth house is where the desire begins, where attraction begins. Then let's say you connect or meet someone that you're attracted to. The sixth house goes into the practical assessments of that connection. And again, this is internal, but the practical assessments are about how you live your daily life, what you do, your habits, your routines. This is also related to really looking at, can this work? And one example I have is around your lifestyle choices. So say, for example, you are a vegan or vegetarian, then maybe you're like, you know what, I can't date a carnivore. Like I just can't. It's not something that fits in with my daily life. So there's practical assessments here. We can be discerning with that sixth house. We can be aware of, I'm always attracted to the same person, but it never gets very far, or it only gets to a certain point. There's something in the sixth house that you're assessing. And this is important because you can have some clear deal breakers here. Or this is where you know yourself, you know your daily routines, you know your habits. You might be like, I can't do long distance, or, I can't do certain kinds of relationships that I've done before because I've realized some things about myself, how I live my life, that doesn't fit or doesn't work. So the sixth house is where we can say yes or no. It's where we have, again, those practical assessments of what fits into our daily life and what works and what doesn't work for you. So it takes it beyond that initial desire, attraction, fun. And, this is where you can be in a loop. This is where you're like always going back to that fifth house, and then nothing gets past the barriers of the sixth house. So the sixth house provides a checking in point. And if it's a yes, if there's, green lights here and you're like, we have similar interests, similar routines, there's things that are connecting here, then you move into the seventh house, which is the socializing, being seen together. This is where something is public. Maybe it's the beginning of being a couple. The seventh house is where you're sharing and getting to know someone and communicating more. So this is the relationship formation house. This is where the relationship begins in more of that giving and receiving energy. Now, going back to the fifth house, you can have sex or have desire, have attraction. That doesn't mean that it's made it to the seventh house of connection. This is where the connection really starts to come alive, where you're starting to get to know someone through life, through communications, through the sense of sitting down and learning, discussing, and knowing more of who they are. So that seventh house is the relationship formation as you're understanding who someone is. The seventh house is typically one-on-one. So it has an element perhaps of monogamy, of a sense of this is the person I'm focusing on. Now, of course, that's going to be different depending on whatever astrological sign or planets you have in this house. But the seventh house is typically about those one-on-one connections. Then as the relationship forms, it goes into the eighth house. Now, the eighth house is about our personal, deeper psychology. It gets into more of who you are, what has formed you, what you're about. It goes into your emotional truths. It is about your ability to trust. Are you able to trust others? Are you able to open up and share? So this is the vulnerability area. This is about true intimacy, and that's the intimacy of getting to know someone else, but it's based on your capacity to know yourself. Where, someone who can only know themselves so far, that's as far as the relationship might go. The 8th house has a tendency to bring up our fears around vulnerability, our fears around opening up and showing parts of ourselves that maybe we're ashamed or afraid to show. There's a part of our human psychology that doesn't want to be vulnerable, but this is where relationships really go deeper and become more real, more intimate, where you're really like getting to know who this person is and how they're getting to know you. So if there are trust issues, that's the 8th house. Intimacy issues, that's the 8th house. This is where the power and control dynamics show up, where there can be power and control around protecting oneself and not being vulnerable. So this would be something to look at in yourself. If you're afraid of opening up or talking about your past experiences or hurts or things in yourself that you perceive as weak or whatever it might be, that's the 8th house. Now, the 8th house also strongly correlates to your emotional foundation, which again goes back to the 4th house. So the 8th house can show you more of what you perceived in childhood, what you observed in your parents, and whether you felt safe in the world, how you've developed the capacity to trust other people or not. And the 8th house is where relationships can die, where you reach those roadblocks of there's no trust here, I don't know what they're doing, they're not opening up, they have secrets, the 8th house has secrets. Maybe they're playing games, like control games. Maybe there's a manipulation tactic. This is where you see the truth of someone. And that 8th house is where something goes on and transforms into a more powerful expression, or it dies. It dies. So the 8th house is really important in your chart for how you form relationships, like the true relationships of people who really know you. And that begins with how you really know yourself. So a lot of depth here in the 8th house. Then the energy moves to the 9th house, which is where you ask the question, where is this going? We have a connection, we like each other, we get along, there's a lot here, we spend a lot of time together, the connection's been growing. Do we have the same life goals? What's our worldview? What are our belief systems? Bigger picture energies here, where you start to understand someone's truth. And it's like after you get to know them over time, there is an element of it takes time to really get to know someone. Yes, you can have that fast desire, attraction. There's things you can maybe try to speed through, but true relationships, you get to know someone over time, just as you get to know yourself over time. So this 9th house brings up the bigger picture questions of, okay, I've gotten to know this person, or see how they show up, or see the 9th house is how you handle disagreements when you perceive yourself as right and the other person is wrong. This is your opinions. This is where you can have some strong, we could even say self-righteous parts of yourself. So the 9th house is very interesting in what it brings up in understanding more of who someone is, what they're about. And of course, that relates to you and your own opinions, your own worldview, how you show up in the world and what you understand about the world. And if that is a match for whomever you're interested in. So then we move into the 10th house, and this is the house of legal commitments, where there's a formalizing contract and there's a shift in public status. So the 10th house is actually the house of marriage. And that's because marriage is a legal commitment. It is a formal contract. It does change your public status to husband and wife, or husband and husband, or wife and wife. It changes your public status And it has more levels of not only commitment, but responsibility. Now you're joint. Now you both have the same legal commitments to each other. So this is the formalizing of a union. This is marriage. And this is where there's a seriousness here, a seriousness to what you're agreeing to what you're signing. And I know that's not the romantic notion of marriage. That's not about the flowers you had at the wedding or what song was your first dance. This is the seriousness of marriage, and it's made to last for a long term if everything is in place, right? If this is a true connection. But that is part of the energy here of the 10th house, the seriousness of our commitments, where we say yes, and where we understand that something is for the long term and that we're meant to honor that. So then after the legal commitments or the formal contracts are made, then we move here into the 11th house, which is about the people you know together, the friends, the bigger circle, the bigger world. This is about activities that you do together, future goals, what you're planning, what you're moving towards as a couple or in the relationship. This is the future, the path ahead, and what you're doing as a unit in your life together. Now, the 11th house, however, is the space to be an individual where you could understand, okay, yeah, we do these things together, but I still have to do my own hobbies. I still have to follow my own passions. I still have parts of my life that are my own. So the 11th house brings up your ability to essentially separate between what it means to do something as a couple or together versus where you need something on your own terms that really supports your individual energy. And this is where you can see if things are, working for you, because healthy relationships, they have space for each person to be themselves still. They're not swallowed up into the other person's identity or overtaken by their relationship. It's like this is where you're looking at, well, what are my individual needs within this union and how am I honoring it? And then in the 12th house, this is private space, detachment, stepping away. So this is energy where you release too much attachment to any one person or any one definition, and you're able to be in that place of openness. This is where, if you have a lot in the 12th house, you need more time to yourself. You need to be alone. You need that private space. And the 12th house prepares you for that return to self, where there's a sense here of, I'm still an individual and I still have to know who I am and take care of myself. And this is kind of that space between where the 12th house allows you to step back and to look at how you allow something to keep growing or flowing organically. There's lack of control here. There's also the energy of, if this is where the ending of relationships is in the 12th house as well, whether that is breakups and things being complete in a connection, whether that is even perhaps like the death of a loved one and letting go and looking back and reflecting on what you learned, what the lessons were, what you came to understand. This is the bigger picture of the dynamic and the bigger picture of the connection. That this is grief. I mean, this is where you process grief, or you need space to move through your own emotional experiences around something. So the 12th house is very private, and it's where we go and to give ourselves the space and the ability to move through a process and detach. So what usually comes up here as we go through this information is people say, well, I don't have any planets in the 10th house. I don't have any planets in the 7th house. Does that mean I'm always going to be single? Does that mean I'm not going to get married? And the short and quick answer is no, that's not what that means. What happens is that you still have energies that show up through transiting planets. So for example, transiting Saturn in the 7th house typically means the seriousness of a relationship, a commitment starting, something beginning that is important. Because wherever transiting Saturn is where your energy is being required to work with something or work on something. So that's just one example of how the transiting planets will bring alive these different themes in your life and in your chart. Now, if you don't have planets in some of these houses, it means that your energy is more comfortable elsewhere. It means your energy feels more at home in other parts of your life and other parts of your chart. Let me give you an example. I've had many clients who have a lot of planets in the first 3 houses, and then they don't have anything in the top 6 houses. And so they're like, am I just doomed to be single? Is this only a lifetime of knowing myself? And it's like, well, yes, you're meant to really know yourself through the first, second, and third houses. You're meant to focus on that. But again, you'll have the energy show up through transiting planets. There's also progressed houses. There's many layers to astrology, as some of you know by now. But you're also then going to be aware of the ruling planets, the ruling signs of each house. And this is, again, where astrology gets more complicated. Now, I teach all this in my course on the astrology of relationships. I teach you what it means in your own chart, like what it means to look at the rulers of your houses, etc. But your energy is, if your energy is mostly in the first through third houses, then relationships are going to stretch you. They're going to require you to step out of your inner world and go into these places that might require more work from you, that aren't going to be as easy or feel as easy at times. So yes, you will have to work on that and be more aware of it, but astrology shows you that. Astrology can help you more conscious, be more conscious of what you're working on in relationships, what the energies are, what to be aware of, and what you're learning. Because, we're always learning, right? And we're always growing. And this is a progression of energy that shows you how your energy flows and how it progresses most easily. So this is a very big topic. There is a lot here. There's a lot to go into. And if you're drawn to that, you would want to really go into more of your own chart and more of what your energy is through this lens of astrology. And keep in mind, you can do so by looking back. You can do so by looking back on, just a moment, by looking back on who you've been attracted to and where you've said no, or where you haven't wanted the relationship to progress. Hindsight is a wonderful teacher. So you could assess it there based on your 5th house of attraction, who you bring in or want to connect with, and then if it goes any further or not. You can look at it through that 8th house of trust issues, vulnerability, where you open up. If you're able to open up and get to know yourself or get to know another, this is really, there's a lot of meat here, so to say, in the 8th house, where the 8th house is understanding. The 8th house is understanding actually more of where your formative childhood experiences shaped you. Because how many times have you realized that these relationships connect to either your parents, how you grew up, the unconscious parts of yourself that you didn't know were there. So the 4th house is very important. And we don't often look at that as a relationship house. But this is the relationship with yourself, and this is what you observed in your parents, and this is what you observed in your early home life. So that 4th house is very important because it's foundational, and it will reveal more about how you feel in trusting others and what you're looking to receive in return. This is where you could also notice patterns in relationships where maybe the relationship gets to a certain point, let's say 6 months, a year, and then something changes in you or something shifts in you. So this is where you can really look at yourself and be very honest with yourself about your own patterns in relationships. And that can be the best teacher and the best catalyst for understanding how you've experienced relationships. So we focused here on these romantic relationships of the dating, mating, relating. There's many other relationships we have in our lives. And in that course, I talk about 10 different types of relationships and how they show up in your chart here. So very fascinating information. Astrology is an ongoing tool for self-empowerment and self-knowledge. And I hope that this video has helped you connect the dots in yourself around the people that you've drawn in or you've been attracted to, your own relationship history, and perhaps some things that maybe you're experiencing in your relationships right now. Thank you so much for joining me, and I'll be back here on my YouTube channel for some more teaching videos. I also have my podcast every Monday and Wednesday, and please check out my playlists where you'll find a ton of topics of things that I've covered over the years. So thank you so much for your likes, shares, subscribes. Thanks for your comments, and I'll see you back here really soon.